DEP North Central Regional Office, Housing and Waste Board. I think it's important to recognize the reason I made that suggestion to sit down with Secretary Quigley is I'm very proud of the fact that the North Central region is by far the most active and most successful region as far as soil protection and planning statewide. We have more of our systems under soil protection plans than any other region. So we have the information, we should be utilizing that. And that's what the coalition's presented to the Secretary is we're paying for this data, EPA is paying for this data, we should be utilizing that more effectively. The Secretary agreed wholeheartedly. So what we're now trying to do is gather all the GIS shape files that have been collected, put those into our mapping system, most likely EMAP-PA, and find a way to utilize that information as we make decisions. That's our responsibility, is to utilize any information we have in order to make decisions. The exact way that information is going to be used from program to program hasn't yet been determined. That's going to require either regulatory changes in some cases, technical guidance, or as simple as standard operating procedure amendments. So we're in the process of kind of moving on both fronts. One is getting this information into our EMAP system so it's available and can be recognized by our permit staff as they're going through the process, and then amending any procedures or regulations necessary in order to actually consider it in our decision in some way, shape, or form. It's still a fluid process as things go on. Unfortunately, as this process has moved on, we've had some structural changes in DEP as recently as Monday announced with some changes on the org chart. So it's been slow, but progress is steady and we're moving forward. So if there are any questions of that later on, I'll be happy to take them.
No, thank you very much for that. You don't know, I've been waiting probably close to 20 years to hear that. So that's something that should have been done when the program first started 20 years ago, but it was not. So we're trying to get that included into the process now. It would be a huge benefit across the state. With that, I think I'm done.
Before we jump to the next topic, what I'm hoping is that those presenters have given you a sense, the Potter County citizen, of what has been going on in this county and how we have been addressing these issues. Not all points will get agreed to, but I do believe we're being responsible. We hold a professional level. I think our credibility has risen quite a ways up into the state levels as to an organizational structure that has value. And we do try to stay ahead of what's going on, not chase it down the road, so to speak. Because we feel the only way to be prepared is to prepare for what you may feel is coming, trends and other things, and Paul's ears to the ground all the time on any subject that can possibly be brought to light. The Potter County Today site covers this on a regular basis. He produces shale gas ground-up letters, notes, memos. So I don't know what will all come out of today, but I think the purpose of having the Natural Gas Resource Center host this public meeting, which we'll move into now, I really felt it was an opportunity to give the citizens of this county a chance to see really what is going on, who's involved with it. There's a lot of good people working really hard to make sure this thing is done right. With all that being said, I have no idea other than we will move to the well pad incident, Reese Hollow, Sweden Township, part of the agenda. We have representatives here from the Department of Environmental Protection, JKLM Energy LLC. I'm not sure how they formatted their public meeting and just how they want to do this thing, whether Paul's been involved with it. I had more concern for the front end of it because I felt this was a great opportunity to get a few people to come out and listen to what might be going on and maybe take some of that out with them also. That being said, you gentlemen, Paul, is there, I don't even know who to introduce other than I know Scott. I know it's at least a little informal as we switch over here, but it's two different formats, so. Good morning.
JKLM Energy. I'd like to thank everybody for coming this morning. We're going to start the presentation off with a presentation by the Department of Environmental Protection, who will discuss their portion of the investigation, and then we'll take it back over and give you some details about our hydrogeologic investigation, and then we'll turn it back over to the DEP for a little discussion about how we're going to move forward with this process. Thank you. Marcus.
I can't see anyone at the board. That's probably good. Is this? We do a presentation. Is it being loaded?
It's on, yeah.
Again, thank you all for coming. Special thanks to the Natural Gas Task Force, or was the task force. Now it is the Resource Center. My apologies. And especially thanks to the commissioners for inviting us here today. What we hope today becomes is a great opportunity to have a useful discussion and get information out to the public as far as what happened at Reese Hollow, what DEP's role is in that, and where we're at in the investigation, and then turn it over to JKLM with the information that they have to present. I'll caveat this by all saying that this is an ongoing investigation by DEP. We're going to be as open and honest as we can. We're going to answer as many questions as humanly possible. But this is an ongoing investigation, so there may be portions where we simply can't provide information because we haven't reached a certain conclusion yet. I hope that everyone can understand that. We expect this to be a very professional dialogue. We certainly want to hear from folks. I know you've been submitting questions. I think those will be useful. If we can't get to them, we look forward to another format to try to answer those questions. But we'll keep our presentation as short and sweet as possible. But please go into it with that expectation. We're going to answer everything we can, but due to the nature of an ongoing investigation, there are some things that we just may not be able to answer. So going through the representatives here, I guess I should have begun by introducing myself, but I'm hoping no one forgot 2 minutes ago. Marcus Cole, DEP Regional Director. Also in the audience is Dan Spadoni, our CRC. Jennifer Meads, who will be doing most of the presentation, our Eastern Oil and Gas District Manager. Dave Engel, who is in the audience back there, is the Group Manager for the Eastern District. Mike Panettiere is also in the audience. Inspector Supervisor Bill Cosmer, who will certainly have a role in this, is the PG for the Eastern District. John Hamilton, up at the end there, Program Manager for Safe Drinking Water. And Randy Farmery, Environmental Cleanup Program, PG Manager. So we have the folks here. We'll do everything we can, but with that, we'll turn it over to Jennifer and have her go through the presentation as best she can.
And Marcus gives me a little too much credit. I'm covering part of it, but not most of it probably. Let's see. I guess before I get started, I do want to thank everyone for coming out. Back in, before I got involved with the Department's oil and gas program, I spent probably the decade or so prior to that working in our watershed program, and I spent a lot of time in Potter County. I was a regular for Potter County Conservation District meetings, and it's good to be back and good to hear how the watershed efforts there are continuing. So my role here today is I'm going to give kind of a brief overview, timeline of events, and then turn it over to Bill and Randy, the two PGs who've been involved. And they're going to talk a little bit more about the investigation in detail. But I'm just going to kind of summarize for you where we are, how we got where we are now, and in case you're not familiar with the background. So this is basically the study area. The green outline is the study area. Up here is the Reese Hollow pad. Down here is Route 6 for some sense of direction, but the green outline is pretty much the study area of this investigation. Okay, so just the timeline of events, what's happened. This started back in September. September 14th, JKLM started drilling the top hole of the Reese Hollow 118 gas well. On Friday, September 18th, was when we first got notification of some sort of reports of soapy water in home water wells. And over that weekend, JKLM went out and collected some samples. Over the following week, we basically got additional reports from more water supplies claiming that they were noticing some change in their water quality. And the department and JKLM's and their consultant pretty much went out and sampled water supplies as we became aware of those instances, and as well as others in the area. September 22nd, there was a meeting with the public water supply wells were sampled at that time, which was really right after this incident started. September 22nd was also the day we sent a notice of legal presumption to JKLM, and I wanted to take the opportunity to explain what this means a little bit, some of the requirements under the Oil and Gas Act. So what I've described here is the presumption requirement of the Oil and Gas Act, which basically says that if there's pollution to a water supply within 2,500 feet of the vertical portion of an unconventional oil or gas well. So that's unconventional well is typically a Marcellus well, a Utica well, something like that. Presumption applies if there's pollution within 2,500 feet and also within a year of some type of activity at that well. And that's defined in the Oil and Gas Act, but it includes drilling, alteration, stimulation at that gas well. So in this case, when we had these occurrences of some sort of pollution in water wells, two of the water supplies that appeared to be affected were fell within that presumption distance and time frame. So we quickly sent out notices relating to that. On September 23rd, JKLM had a meeting with the public water suppliers in Potter County EMA, and at that time, use of the public water supplies in the areas was stopped as a precautionary measure. And September 26th, again in the early part of this, we received a call that there was a pond along Route 6 that may have been impacted, and the department and JKLM began sampling that as well. September 30th, the department issued a notice of violation to JKLM for violations of both the Oil and Gas Act and the Clean Streams Law for the release that occurred. Through October and November, the investigation pretty much continued by both parties. A lot of additional samples collected at water supplies and surface water sources. October 27th, the department sent what we call determination letters to the water supply owners who fell within presumption, basically saying that JKLM was presumed responsible for any pollution to those water supplies. And you might be thinking, well, why not until October 27th? Again, we sent the notice to JKLM up front indicating that they had to provide temporary water, but we generally wait until we have all of our sampling data back before we send an official letter to the property owners. And that generally does take a month or so to get our data back, especially with the types and number of samples that we were collecting as part of this investigation. Late October, early November, as you can see, there were 4 monitoring wells installed on the well pad. JKLM was interested in plugging the well bore that was located on the well pad, and we were also interested in having that done. We thought that was, the best thing to do. However, we didn't want that plugging activity to commence until there were monitoring wells, so that we could monitor if there was some sort of change to the aquifer that might impact water supplies just as a result of that plugging activity. So those monitoring wells were installed and sampled by JKLM, and then the plugging efforts at the gas well commenced, and that was completed November 18th. And then the next day, JKLM initiated sampling of the water supplies and monitoring wells post-plugging effort to see if there were any changes. And then December 14th, earlier this week, the department sent 4 additional determination letters to residents, water supply owners, where we believe there were additional impacts. Now, those 4 private water supplies fall outside of that presumption distance and time frame. So they're more than 2,500 feet away from the location of the gas well. So that And what that does, the whole presumption, I guess, to explain a little further, it's a burden of proof. Who bears the burden of proof? So if it's within presumption distance, kind of the operator's presumed responsible, the burden is on the operator to prove it wasn't them. If it's outside of that distance, the burden is on the department to prove they are responsible for an impact. And when I say all this, just to be clear, there's been no adversarial relationship here. We have been in communication with JKLM throughout this, and from the very beginning, they've been willing to provide water to whomever we ask and do additional sampling. So this is more just kind of the official side of it, but from day one, we've been assured that water is being provided to the water supplies where we believe that there's an impact. And I think that brings me to the end of the summary, and then Randy and Bill are going to talk about the investigation in a little bit more detail.
Welcome, everybody. As Jennifer said earlier, Bill and I are professional geologists, and we've been overseeing sort of the investigation phase of this. We're going to sort of do a tag team effort here, pass the mic back and forth, as we've been coordinating a lot, and different ones of us have different expertise and hit our fingers in different pieces of it. So I'm going to start, and I'll turn it over to Bill, and he has some slides, and then it comes back to me, I guess, as we get into some other stuff. So I wanted to start with just this basic slide, which is what's an investigation. And any investigation we do, whether it's a Superfund site or something like this, or a home heating oil release, it really comes down to two questions. What was released and where did it go? And so that was where we started this investigation and every investigation. And we'll talk about all these points in the subsequent slide. So what was released is, what chemicals, compounds are on the pad, and then where did it go? That's really what media can we monitor and see how far contamination is spread and that. So in this case, we had home wells, we had public water supply wells, and we had surface water points already, surface water streams, I should say, already in existence that could be sampled. And then to supplement that, we put in, JKLM has put in monitoring wells for areas that were not covered by the pre-existing network. And to reiterate what was said earlier, the environmental investigation is certainly an ongoing investigation, and it's an iterative process. So we'll get through this phase, we'll look at all the results, and we'll see, do we need more wells? Do we need to expand surface water sampling, any sampling? So this is sort of a snapshot of phase one of the investigation, but it's by no means what I would consider a final investigation. So what was used, or what may have been released? From both from what JKLM has told us in our investigations at the pad, there were two major compounds that may have been used at the pad and been a part of the release. One was a surfactant, it's isopropanol, which is an alcohol-based foam soap agent, and the other thing was rock oil was used in assisted with drilling. And so that's usually a petroleum-based. There were several different rock oil products on the pad, and as shown on the subsequent slide, to be conservative, we sampled for a wide range of compounds so that we could cover all potential bases. Something that was on one of Jennifer's early slides, some of these products were not authorized for oil use in this case. So what did he sample for? There's a list. Start out MBAS, it's methylene blue analyzing substance. It's just an indicator of soap or surfactants. Any soap will show up on that. It's sort of the best screen that we have for that. Isopropanol, which was what was the alcohol that the soap was based, excuse me. If you can't tell, I'm a nervous speaker, so please forgive me. And there's a reason they don't let me have a laser pointer, because you'd all be seasick as it does. So my apologies for that. We sampled also for volatile organic compounds and semi-volatile organic compounds. A list of a total of 65 volatiles and 68 semi-volatiles. And that's the complete volatile organic scan and semi-volatile organic scan that our lab runs. And that comes back to, we were not 100% sure of what was in the rock oil. So to be conservative, we sampled for everything that could reasonably be there. To continue on, the next one, we did metals and general chemistry. That's the analysis we used to look for brine. We had no reason to believe that the brine was an issue at this depth and with the water that was used. But to be conservative, we sampled for it. And the last thing is methane, ethane, and propane. And that's also just to be conservative. Again, at this depth, we would not expect those to be an issue, but we want to know. So a brief overview of how many samples we collected. 100 groundwater wells and springs that have been sampled, well over that in fact now. We've got 9 established stream points that have been sampled. Between JKLM and DEP, we've well over 500, nearly 600 individual samples have been collected from the various springs, streams, monitoring wells, public water supply wells, home wells. So I'm just turning it over to you at this point, Bill. Sit down and try to stop shaking here.
All right, I'll just touch a little bit on what we found here with the private water supplies, since that's primarily my role in this. Again, initial results, we saw very low levels of the isopropanol, nothing over standard, but we did see it in a handful of wells. Acetone, it showed up in several water supplies, again, at very low concentration, below any standards, but acetone is associated with the isopropanol as a breakdown product of the isopropanol. We did see, again, very low concentrations of a couple of DEP parameters, which is essentially petroleum, benzene, toluene, methylbenzene, xylenes, and some others. I don't believe anything over standard there. Again, extremely low concentrations, but they were there. We did see some MBAS, some of the surfactants, and the primary issue that we had here with most of these water supplies was an increase in turbidity, basically from disturbing the aquifer when they hit a very large fracture when they were drilling, which also increased some metals because of the sediment increase. You'll have metals that actually absorb onto the sediment particles. So we did see some increases in metals from the turbidity. As mentioned previously, alternative water supplies were provided to the impacted residents and then some. I believe JKLM made water available to anybody that requested it. No groundwater sampling results from the home wells currently exceed any primary drinking water standards for any constituents related to the release, so the isopropanols, the acetone. I guess the one kind of caveat I would put there is that we do still have 1 or 2 water supplies that are showing very minor turbidity detections, and because of that, we still do have some metals that are slightly higher than we'd like to see them. Whether or not that continued turbidity is related to the release or as a result of a pre-existing condition, we're really not sure. As we're continuing to monitor, continuing to investigate, we're actually setting up to collect another round of samples from all the homes that the department is investigating. So overall, the department received 14 complaints from private homeowners. Some of those, they complained that they actually saw an observable change in their water supply. Others were just concerned. So basically, anyone that called us, we sent the department out to sample the well. Sent some of our water quality specialists out to sample. Of those 14, we've issued 6 positive determinations, as Jen had stated. We were able to issue 1 non-impact determination, and there's still 7 that are currently being evaluated at this time. Currently, I would tend to lean towards they aren't really showing any signs of an impact, but again, we're continuing to collect additional data out there, so once we get that data, we'll make decisions on those 7 at that time. The public water supplies, I'll touch on this a little bit, and then I don't know if John wants to add anything down there, but the pumps were turned off as a precautionary measure, just not to spread the fume. We did have a fairly rapid transport time with this substance when it was discovered. So just out of precaution, we shut down the public water supplies just not to draw that into them. We've not seen any evidence of the release to the public water supplies. And I believe, John, correct me if I'm wrong, it's up to the public water supply operators to basically, petition us to turn these wells back on, which I think they're in the process of doing. And as it mentions here, prior to them putting them back basically into production, there'll be a 72-hour pump test where the samples collected to make sure that nothing shows up in those supplies before they're put back for public use. I don't know if you want to add anything to that, John.
Yeah, I'll just jump in here. I've been working with the public water supplies since we do regulate that entity, that being Calversport Municipal Authority and the Cole Memorial Hospital. I did speak with Cole representatives early on September 27th when I found out about this release. Told them the precautionary aspect would be to turn the wells off. Likewise, Calversport Borough, as Bill said, did cease operation of their east wells as a precautionary measure. In the intervening time, I had some staff go out on both September 29th and October 6th to collect samples from both of those entities, the Cole wells and the Calversport wells. We also ran the full suite of organic contaminants, semi-organic, semi-volatile organic contaminants, inorganic contaminants, and other general chemistry. And at this point, there has been no indication of any impacts to either water supplies. At this point, we did inform Calversport and Cole that it's their decision to request turning the wells back on. We would evaluate the status of those wells prior to allowing them to serve water to the public. What we're going to ask for is a 72-hour pumping and purging of the wells to stress the aquifer, and then we will collect samples, and both Calversport and Cole would also collect samples at that time. We essentially split samples with those folks. We would review the sample results, and if it's determined that there is no impact to those water supplies, we would then concur and allow them to turn those supplies back on.
So I'll wrap up the investigation part of it. One of the phases we haven't got to yet is surface water. One of the early things we did was establish 8 surface water points so that we could go back and duplicate the same points in time. So there were 8 surface water points established. There also were numerous springs that were sampled where they came out, and the one pond that was mentioned earlier that showed an impact. We did see one spring and a pond that showed an impact initially, but much like the public or the private water supplies, there's no current impact observed in them. Monitoring wells. As we mentioned earlier, 4 monitoring wells were put up on the pad prior to JKLM doing any more work with the gas well, and that was to make sure that we had points close to that to monitor for any changes in the aquifer from the well abandonment procedures. All of the monitoring wells were in fact constructed to mimic the construction of the nearby home wells, because that's the user that we want to be most protective of, is this impacting the home wells of them. Packer tests, it says we're performing Packer is simply, it's a high-tech balloon. So you inflate a balloon above a certain interval in the well and below it, and you can seal off a specific interval and get water from this specific fracture, or this specific interval within the well, so that you're not mixing all the water in the column. They had run some geophysics as part of this also, and that helps you identify where the water's coming in, and you can sample specific intervals within a well, and that was the Packer test. The geophysics, there were a wide range of geophysics run to both detect fractures and also looking at lithology and other things in the well. As was mentioned before, we sampled the monitoring wells both before and after the abandonment of the gas well, and we also had pressure transducers that were in both the monitoring wells and the home wells at the time of abandonment. And a pressure transducer is just looking for a change in the water elevation while these activities were going on, because that would be a real quick first sign, perhaps, that there might be issues of concern with the abandonment on the home wells. What the monitoring results show us. No surprise there that the geophysics showed that there was a lot of fractures in the subsurface and the monitoring wells intercepted. That's good. That's what we wanted them to do, because that was what we believe was a transport mechanism to begin with, was the fractures that were encountered with the gas well. The results, so far we've completed 2 rounds of sampling. We have found the same sort of contaminants that we found in the other sampling points, the MBAS, the BTEX, and the difference is we found 2 plasticizers here. They're fairly common sampling or lab contaminants. We'll continue to look at them and see and try to understand if that's what they're from or if it's from something that was used on the pad. We haven't drawn a firm conclusion on that. And the last bullet here, we're looking at additional monitoring well locations in the future once we have a chance to better digest this, and there certainly will be additional rounds of sampling of the monitoring wells that are there. Mr. Van Terry. Mike's our well plugging and abandonment guy. I'll let him take that.
Yeah, so I'm Mike Manatari, oil and gas inspector supervisor for the DEP out of Williamsport. I'm very fortunate today because I only have 1 slide to present. On October 21st, JKLM submitted the notice of intent to flood form. When we received those, we reviewed the document for compliance with the flooding regulations, and we'll discuss those with the operator and discuss schedule and that kind of thing. So JKLM mobilized the site November 17th and cleaned out the well bore from surface to attainable bottom, which is 684 feet. They set the bottom 50-foot bottom cement plug. November 18th, after waiting on cement to set, they placed gravel in 2 flights, or 2 lifts, and that's basically to not impede the flow of water through the aquifer. After that, excuse me, they, on November 19th, they submitted placed this sand above that gravel pack, and then a cement plug on top of that. Sand filter pack is basically intended so the sand won't infiltrate, or the top plug won't infiltrate through to the gravel top plug. We welded a plate on top of that, and the plug certificate, which I received actually this morning, was due on the 19th.
Nope. So I'll just kind of wrap things up with the department here. Ongoing activities. Currently, monitoring is ongoing at the 15 groundwater locations, 8 surface water locations on a weekly basis. The hydrogeological evaluation that JKLM is doing is ongoing. I believe they're going to talk about that more. The department's enforcement action is still being developed. I know that's one of the questions we've seen out there. And frankly, this type of investigation, as Marcus said at the very beginning, goes on for quite a long time. So that's a question we're not going to be able to answer anytime soon. We generally work through these entire processes, get through remediation, and see how all of that goes before we make those kinds of decisions. Plan future activities to permanently restore or replace any impacted water supplies. So again, responsibilities under the Oil and Gas Act. If an operator is presumed responsible and doesn't really contest that, or if we make determinations that an operator is responsible for impacting a water supply, there's an obligation under the Oil and Gas Act to permanently restore or replace that water supply. That can happen in a number of different ways. We're having discussions about, generally it happens through the use of some sort of treatment system on an existing water supply. So we'll be having those conversations both with JKLM and ensuring that whatever's proposed is agreeable to the property owners involved. So from what I understand, there's interest in, from the property owners to use their own water supplies again, and we do think that, we should be able to move forward with making that happen. I think John already covered it, resume operations of public water supplies once they submit those requests and they're properly evaluated. And ultimately, at the end, we would expect the submittal of some sort of final report. Again, that will probably be a little ways down the road because there's quite a bit of ongoing monitoring planned. Yeah. So that's it for us, and I think we'll turn it over to JKLM. Contact information for Dan Spadoni, our community relations coordinator, again, who was pointed out at the beginning, if there are follow-up questions. Yep.
Just one point on the public water supplies. It's certainly worth noting that DEP has had recent contact with both Co-Memorial and Aquifer. Co-Memorial doesn't have right now a timeline for turning those well supplies on. Aquifer has indicated some interest, and we've reiterated the steps that they would need to take to do that. We haven't been in contact with them since they've been aware of those steps. So with that, I'll turn it over to Commissioner Morley.
Yeah, just real quick, before we start the next half of this presentation,